And
This
you can go.
conference will now be recorded.
All right. So welcome everyone to the APA 7th edition workshop. We actually just switched over to this not too long ago. We were using the 6th edition for a long time, and they made a 7th edition. So now we have to get used to that one. So if you have any APA experience in the past, you may still learn a few things during this workshop because they have changed a few things. So this is what the new publication manual looks like. And this presentation is going to cover, so I'll go over general APA paper formatting, just the basics. Citing sources within your paper, so the in-text citation rules. Creating reference entries for cited sources. So when you use a source within your paper, you also want to have a reference entry that corresponds. So we'll talk about how to format those. And then I'll cover some frequently asked questions that I encounter from my students. All right, so first of all, the formatting basics. Your essay, obviously this is kind of obvious info, but it should be typed. It should be double spaced uniformly throughout. You want to have 1-inch margins on all sides, 10 to 12 point standard font, and if you print it, it should fit an 8.5 by 11 page. Now, I do recommend you don't have to do this, set this up all on your own. There is a template available in the LRC. Can you guys see the screen okay? It should say formatting basics. Sometimes the PowerPoints can get a little, okay, perfect, good. So I'm going to bring up the LRC and just show you where those resources are. So you're aware. You should have it on your dashboard. So if you scroll down to resources and links, actually the APA, I'm going to click on APA. And here we have resources. Okay, so I'm going to click on that. And there is a link to the manual here that you can purchase yourself. There's also a link to the APA style blog. So if you ever have a question about how to format anything in particular, you can go there. The APA itself is also a great source of information, and they have a sample paper there on their website that you can use. It's actually a great template to use. You can just download it and use it to type your own papers. Just go over it with your own info, and then the formatting is already done for you. The Purdue OWL is an excellent resource as well. You may have already used it in the past. They're pretty well known for their, all things English and formatting. And then this is the official resource for all APA related topics, apastyle.apa.org. All right. So we're gonna X out of here. And then I'll start presenting again. All right, and let me know if, what I'm saying doesn't quite match up with what's on the screen, and I'll do my best to get that fixed for you, because sometimes it can lag a bit. All right, so an APA paper needs to have 4 major sections. If you have experience with MLA in the past, which is what most incoming students have used in high school or otherwise, you didn't have to make a title page. You just started writing your paper on the first page. So APA does require a title page. However, the 6th edition has been updated by the 7th edition, and the running head on the top left is no longer required in APA. So good news, because it was kind of a pain to deal with. If your instructor requests an abstract, that would be the 2nd section of your paper. The main body, so the actual paper itself, is going to be the 3rd section. And then your references page will be the last section. So this is, you should be looking at a sample title page. So we see here what APA 7th edition looks like for your title page. So at the top, running head is no longer required for student papers. However, you still do need the page number at the top right here. And you also are going to have your paper title listed here. So it's going to be in bold, should be centered on the upper half of the title page. You're going to hit enter 3 to 4 times from the top. And then you're going to hit enter. There's a little bit of an extra space here. Then you're going to type your name, the name of the school, the course information, the professor's name, and then the paper due date itself. All right. Now the font is going to be, I'm going to go back here. You're going to use the same font throughout the entire paper. Never change your font style. The suggested types you should see down here. Those include 11-point Calibri, which is what you see right now, 11-point Arial, 12-point Times New Roman, and 11-point Georgia. So any of those are acceptable fonts for APA. Just make sure you're using the same font throughout your paper. All right. So this is taken directly from the APA style guide. So an abstract is just a summary of the contents of your paper. Most scholarly journals are going to require an abstract. If you've ever perused an online database, you may have found journal articles that have an abstract included, and that just gives you a rundown of everything that is covered in the paper in a tiny, like a paragraph. So you don't have to search through the whole entire article to find out if it's relevant to your research. So if you look at that last sentence there that is highlighted at the bottom, an abstract is not usually required for student papers unless requested by the instructor or institution. So APA does differentiate between student papers and professional papers. So professional papers are ones that are being submitted to scholarly journals or other types of situations like that. Student paper is done to fulfill course requirements, which is what you'll be doing. So unless your instructor requires an abstract, just assume you don't need one, but always ask just in case. All right, so this is an example of the first page of your actual paper, which if you have an abstract, it'll be page 3. If you don't have an abstract, it'll be page 2, right? So your title is going to once again be centered at the top of the page, and then you'll start writing your paper. Indent every paragraph as you go, each new paragraph. And you can see several examples here of in-text citations. APA does use parenthetical type citations like MLA, but just they require different information from MLA. Notice also there's no extra space in between paragraphs. So for some reason, I'm not sure why, But Microsoft Word has a default setting that if you hit enter, it adds extra space in between paragraphs or between lines. So I'm going to show you really quickly how to get rid of that setting so you don't lose points for having extra space between your paragraphs. So I'm looking at the home tab of my Microsoft Word. So right here where you see paragraph, hit that arrow and a window will pop up. So looking at the spacing, you want it to be double spaced. That's already done for you, but you want this box to be checked. Don't add space between paragraphs of the same style. So if I uncheck it, it's going to add space between paragraphs. We don't want that, so we're going to keep it checked. And you can even set it as your default for next time. All right. So I'm going to X out of here. And let's take a look at the next slide. So this is once your paper, the main body of your paper is finished, you're going to begin a new page and you're going to type references at the top, centered and bolded. So for MLA style, you put works cited at the top. For APA, it is references at the top. You still have the same formatting as far as hanging indentation. So that just means that the first line of every entry is going to be left justified. Every subsequent line of each entry is going to be indented. And then you'll also organize them in alphabetical order by author's last name. And you'll still have a page number on your reference page. Every page should have a number at the top right. All right, so that basically covers all of the formatting that you'll need to have completed for your APA style paper. So we're going to get into in-text citations now. So if you ever use any sources in your paper, you have to cite them, otherwise you're guilty of plagiarism, right? And we don't want that. So if I don't copy and paste a direct quotation in my paper, if I just paraphrase something in my own words, do I still have to cite it? Yes, I do, because it's not my original idea, it's someone else's idea, even though I may be expressing it in a different way. So whether you summarize, whether you paraphrase, whether you use a direct quotation, you're always going to provide a citation, an in-text citation. And those just give credit to your sources within your paper. And they also let the reader know how to find the comprehensive information on the reference page. All right. So what to include in an in-text citation? You're always going to provide the author's last name. You're going to provide a date. APA is a social sciences scientific way or method of citation. So dates are very important, right, in those fields. We want to make sure we're dealing with the most recent current information available. So that is why we include the date. And then if you have a direct quotation, you're going to include a page number. If you don't have a page number, for example, if you're on a website and it's just one big scroll down, right, you're gonna provide a paragraph number. But just if there's no page number and you use a direct quotation, you should always let your reader know where that specific location is within your source. All right. So another thing I like to show my students when I'm telling them how to use quotations or implement sources in their papers is I like to use the quote sandwich. So the top bun is where you introduce your quotation. We don't ever want to start a sentence with a quotation mark, right? We want to introduce that quotation before we use it. So you're going to use a signal phrase to tell your readers that you're about to use source material. So you might say something like, author's last name, Cito, argued that, or you might say something like researchers observed, and then provide your quotation or your source material, which is the meat of the sandwich, right? And you're also going to cite it, with whatever citations that are needed in there. And then finally, the bottom piece of bread, that's going to be your explanation of why it's there, the context. Because it might not be as obvious to your readers as it is to you as to why you've added that quotation there. What does it mean in the context of your paper? So just make sure that you're using this style of implementing sources, and it'll make it a lot easier for you and your teachers. Here are some tips for implementing signal phrases. So you don't want to use the same one every time. I've read student papers before, and it's like, according to this author, according to that author, according to this study, according to that study, and it gets really repetitive. So just make sure that you're mixing those up a little bit. So you might say, according to Smith, and then provide the source material. You might say, Smith compares this study with that study, etc. But just make sure that you mix it up a little bit to avoid redundancy. All right, so let's look at an example within a paper itself. So there are two different ways that you can use in-text citations. One is the narrative in-text citation. So that is when the author's name is in the text of the sentence. You mention the author's name in the sentence. So Stein studied, and notice the dates there in parentheses. The date is always going to follow the author's last name. So wherever that last name is, that's where the date's going to be. So Stein, 2018, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's the page number at the end, right here. I don't count off if you use a page number for a paraphrase. How do we know that this is not, or how do we know that this is a paraphrase and not a direct quotation? You can type it in the chat box. I'm going to quiz you. There are no quotation marks. Good job. Yes, anytime you directly quote someone, you're going to put quotation marks around that material. Yes, perfect. So, but I definitely won't count off if you use it for a page number for a paraphrase as well. But they are definitely required page numbers for direct quotations. All right. So look at this next sentence after the page number. Another study found similar data showing that individuals as young as 18 displayed symptoms of the disease. Now, we did not mention the author's name in that sentence, right? So we're going to use the parenthetical way at the end of the sentence. Tang and Pierce, comma, 2014, comma, page 231. All right. And then the punctuation mark goes at the end. So we know that this citation goes with this sentence. All right. So there are several rules. I'm not going to read all of this to you right now. I will give you a handout that has this on it when this workshop is over. But depending on how many authors you have, you're going to have different in-text citations. So for one author, at the end of in the parenthetical citation at the end of a sentence, you're just going to simply have the author's name, a comma, and the date. And then this is what the narrative one looks like next to it. So for two authors, parenthetical citation is Smith, ampersand Brown, comma 2019. If I mention them in the sentence as a narrative citation, I'm going to spell out the and. So Smith, A-N-D, Brown. And then the date in parentheses beside their names. If I have three or more authors, it's going to be the first author that's listed et al. And that et al just means and others. So we're not listing 20 different authors, right, in our citation. That gets distracting. So if there are three or more, you can use that et al. Sometimes you won't have an author's name, a specific author, right? So you're going to use an organization as the author. So, for example, you might find a really good article on the CDC website, right? But there's no person associated with that article. So the CDC is going to be the author. And the first time that you mention that citation in your paper, they're going to spell out the entire title of the organization. So Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, you're going to put CDC in brackets if it's parenthetical or parentheses if it's a narrative. And then anytime you use that citation afterward in your paper, you can just say CDC and you don't have to spell it out every time. So we mentioned that dates are really important. Even if you can't find a date, you still have to indicate that. So for sources with no publication date, you can see that you'll just use the N.D. to indicate no date was available. And that's the way it'll look on the references page as well. And by the way, any of these citations that you use in your paper, for example, Smith and Brown. So if I want to find that reference entry at the end of my paper on that list, Smith needs to be the first name, right, listed on that reference entry. So I just say, okay, Smith, I go to the reference page, I see Smith. Even if there are a bunch of different authors, right, they still need to be in the same order. All right, so now let's talk about reference entries. So the order of information as a general guideline is you're going to list who, you're going to find who the author is, then you're going to find when it was published, then you're going to give a what. So what is it? Is it the title of a journal article? Is it a book? Is it a web page? What is it? That's where that title goes there. And then where did you find it is the last thing you're going to include. So if it's an article title, what's the name of the journal? What's the URL, the website link that I can go to find it? So if you're ever in doubt and you're saying, I have no idea how to put this on the reference page, just remember that this is a fairly complex system of citation. So ask yourself, what type of source am I dealing with here? Is it a journal article? Is it a book? Is it a web page? Is it a YouTube video, etc.? And then go to a credible source like the Purdue OWL or the APA website. Find an example of that type of source and copy your information based on that example, mirror that example. That's the best advice I can give you. I do not recommend that you use generators like a reference entry generator, citation machine, or whatever, unless you're checking it against the APA website or the Purdue OWL. And the reason for that is it's a computer that's generating those references. There's nobody monitoring it for accuracy. And more times than not, I've found they are not completely correct. So I can usually tell when my students have used a reference generator because there will be weird, everything's in a weird order, or, article titles will be in all caps, or things will be in italics that should not be in italics, et cetera, et cetera. So just make sure you don't want to lose points for things that are fairly easy to fix if you just go check it out. All right, so the general rules for reference page are that book titles are sentence case and italicized. What I mean by sentence case is that you would write it out just like you would a sentence. So normally when you write titles, you think, I will capitalize every major word in this title. But it's not the case on a APA style reference page, at least for books. So that means the book title itself, the first letter, the first letter of the first word is going to be capitalized. After that, only proper nouns are going to be capitalized. Words that come after a colon will be capitalized. And it's the same with journal titles, journal publication titles. So with article titles, the only thing you're going to do to those is put them in sentence case. They won't be italicized. There's no quotation marks around them on the reference page, nothing. Just write it out, write the title out like you would write a sentence. And then journal publication titles are title case. So you're going to capitalize all major words and you're going to put them in italics. So let's look at an example. This is directly from the APA style guide. I have a copy of the ebook. So this is a journal article with a DOI. DOIs stand for Digital Object Identifiers. It's a special link given to that particular article. So if you have the DOI, always use the DOI in place of the URL, the link. All right, so this is the way you're going to format the author. Last name, comma, first initial, period. And this one has a first and middle initial. So last name, comma, first initial, period, second initial, period, comma, and then an ampersand between the last author listed and the one before it. All right, and then the next thing is going to be the date in parentheses. Remember, it's the who, when, then the what, so the title of the article, and it's just written like a sentence. Then we have the journal title, the periodical information. So we have it italicized and major words are capitalized. Volume and issue numbers are also included in a reference entry if they're part of the source. Then you're going to put a comma after that. And what pages from the journal does that article appear in? So this article came from pages 5 through 14 within that journal, right? So we're going to put that there. And finally, the last part of the where is the DOI or the URL. So here's an example of one that's been done. We have Macaulay, SM, and we have Christensen, MH, 2019, this is the title of the article, Language Learning as Language Use, colon, then we capitalize the word after the colon, a cross-linguistic model of child language development, period. So that's the what, that's the title. Then the where, well, it came from the Psychological Review, right, the journal, comma, volume issue, comma, page range, and then finally the DOI. And that's what an in-text citation would look like underneath that corresponds to that reference entry. And I'm not going to go through every single example of references just because there are so many, but I did want to cover the ones that are more common that I see in my papers that I receive from students, just to give you kind of a variety. So if you have a journal article without a DOI and it didn't come from a database, it came from online, you'll do it the same way. You're just gonna put the link, the URL, instead of the DOI because you don't have one. Now this one's important. It's a journal, a magazine or newspaper article without a DOI, and let's just say it came from the Learn database, right? It came from an academic research database or a print version. You have a hard copy. So you're not going to include a database name. You're not going to copy and paste the database URL. You're simply going to stop after you include the page numbers. Okay. So let's say you find a magazine article from Science Magazine online. So these are going to include the day and the month as well as the year in the reference entry. So Ferguson, comma S is the author of this magazine article. It was published on January 4th, 2019, put it in that format. And then this is the article title, Really Cool Neutroplasmas, right? And then science, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to include the DOI or the URL as we see underneath that example with the Bustillos article. All right. If we have a newspaper article, same thing, right? You're going to have the day, the month, the year, in addition to everything else. And then this one is one that people get tripped up on sometimes. So it's a web page on a news website. So say you find something from CNN, the Huffington Post, et cetera, MSNBC, BBC News. You're going to italicize and use sentence case on the title of that news website article. And then you're just going to include CNN or whatever it is that you're using, not italicized after the title. And then include the link, obviously, always. All right. So just some tips to remind you, don't rely on citation generators. Always check against a reliable source. Use APA resources. I have uploaded a bunch of them to the LRC Canvas page. There are multiple resources online. We don't want you to be lazy, right? You don't want to lose unnecessary points on APA formatting and citation mistakes. I've had students turn in papers that only had a list of links at the end as their references. And needless to say, that is not an acceptable form of citing your sources on the reference page. All right, does anybody have any questions before we move on to the next section? No. Okay. Perfect. So I'm going to talk about some questions that students frequently ask me. So say you're using the same source throughout your paper. You're analyzing one article for your entire paper. Do I have to cite the source over and over and over? No, you don't. That is distracting. Um, Oversighting is a thing. Unfortunately, so is underciting. So you don't want to be guilty of either one. Jessica Myra, will there be someone we can run it by before turning it in? Yes, I am, under normal circumstances in the LRC on campus, and students can come up to me, whenever they want, and I can look over their papers for them. You can also email me and I'll look over it for you as well. So if I'm using the same source throughout my paper, what is the appropriate level of citation? So if you are using multiple narrative citations, remember that's when you use the author's name in the sentence, you don't have to keep citing it within the same paragraph. When you move on to a new paragraph, you just repeat that process. And this link is here to give you an example of that. I will give you guys access to this PowerPoint when we're done. And you can click on the links or explore whatever you want to. All right. How should I cite source material containing 40 or more words? So if I have a really long quotation, how do I handle that? So this is called a block quotation. And we don't put quotation marks around those. So we're going to hit enter, indent them 1/2 inch additionally. And the parenthetical citation goes after the block quotation, final punctuation. So this is one that I discourage unless you are writing a really long paper, right? Because we don't want our papers to have too much outside sources in them, right? I usually tell my students about 20% of your paper should consist of outside sources. The rest of it should be you. So if you've got, a 2 to 4 page paper, a block quotation is going to take up a huge percentage of what you're allowed to use. So I just tell them paraphrase as much as possible, right? As much as you can put in your own words, do so. So here's an example of a block quotation with a parenthetical citation. So you can see the researchers have studied how people talk to themselves. Then we have a colon, we hit enter, and then we indent an additional 1/2 inch. And then here we have the end punctuation and then the parenthetical citation afterward. No quotation marks, even though this is a direct quotation. If it's a block quotation, you don't need those. All right. So next slide. What if the source I am using is quoting or using information from another source? So sometimes I'll have students come to me and they'll say, I found this really great information that really supports, the research I'm trying to do in my paper. But this article is quoting someone else. So how do I cite that? So first of all, this is called a secondary source. You don't want to use those unless you have to. It's always best to find the original source and cite it. However, if you must use the secondary source, it should look like this. So you're going to use the original author's name So you have Robertson et al. That's your source that you're using. They're quoting Johnson in their article, right? So this is going to go first, then the date, and then you're going to say as cited in Robertson et al., and then the date of that article. What if two or more authors have the same last name? So if two or more authors have the same last name, you just need to include their initials as well in text if they have different initials. If they share both last name and initials, you're just going to use the standard author and date format. There's really not much you can do at that point. And then finally, my paper includes more than one source by the same author, and the publication dates are the same. So we can't differentiate between publication dates, and we have the same author. So we are going to put a lowercase letter after the year to distinguish between the two sources. And then those will also appear on the references page the same way. All right. So hopefully that answered some of your questions regarding APA. Like I said before, in answer to your question, you can always email me at this email address, and I can answer any APA related questions that you have. Or you can reach out to your instructor. If your instructor is requiring APA, then they definitely should be able to help you with citing and documenting sources within APA style. So if you're taking a class, if you're taking politics, if you're taking a psych class, if you're taking culture and health, if you're taking an English class, you are going to be required to write in APA format, and you certainly will be required to do it in core, once you hit your core nursing classes. So it's best to learn it now and make your mistakes now and learn from them, so you're better prepared for your core classes, evidence-based practice, that sort of thing. Do you guys have any more questions for me?